Good evening. It is taught by many Eastern schools of mysticism that the sex force should be sublimated before complete enlightenment may be attained. This is part of the same belief that says that if you give up eating meat, you'll get spiritual. And both of these are part of the same belief that is offered in the Christian church or the Hebrew church, that if you just are good, you'll get into heaven. Now, we read last night that the greatest prophet of all was John the Baptist, and yet the very least of these, of the spiritual kingdom, would get into heaven before he did. It really makes no difference how good you become. It is no assurance of any entrance into heaven or spiritual living. It is exactly the other way around. As you attain greater degrees and depths of spirituality, you become good. This also was the subject of last night's lesson. As one is touched by spiritual consciousness, the sex desire disappears, sometimes completely in one flash of illumination, at other times gradually. But as spiritual consciousness deepens, the sex urge does completely disappear. And all desires of a human nature disappear. It is the same way that as spiritual consciousness deepens, the desire for eating meat lessens, and in many cases entirely disappears. And even where the continuing of the eating of meat goes on, often it is not because of any desire for it. It is because society as we live it today, especially in hotel living or family living, makes it very difficult to give up the eating of meat and at the same time eat properly so as to feed the body without the use of meat. So that whether or not one actually gives up the use of meat, the desire does disappear with the coming of spiritual light. And it is the same way, very often in families, for the sake of families, the sex life is continued long after one of the parties to the marriage has risen in spiritual consciousness to where it is no longer a part of their necessary experience. Now, in this I'm trying to show you the entire purpose or function, or functioning really, of the infinite way without organization. That we are not trying to get spiritual by obeying rules. We are not trying to get spiritual by going to church or by doing a certain amount of reading. We are not trying to get spiritual by giving up sex or giving up meat. We are trying, by abiding in spiritual literature and scripture, we are trying to attain spiritual realization. In the measure that we attain it, all of the other things take place. All of the desires for physical pleasures and the physical pains. In other words, you do not only lose your physical pains when spiritual consciousness, your physical pains, you also lose your physical pleasures. You have no longer pleasures in dancing, no longer pleasures in theaters. It doesn't mean that they're entirely eliminated from your experience, but they are no longer major factors, nor are they necessities, nor are ball games or football games or cricket games. They may still be enjoyed occasionally, but they are really not necessary as spiritual consciousness takes over. But do not think that by giving up dancing or by giving up theaters or by giving up a cricket game that you're going to get spiritual, because it does not work that way. It works the other way. Seek ye the kingdom of God. Seek ye spiritual realization, and the pleasures and the pains of sense will disappear. And sometime in a flash, as it did with Saul of Tarsus. Sometimes it is a gradual experience. It is taught in the infinite way that those who realize their true identity will not see death. And that is true. The very moment you realize that I am not body, I am I, and I am not in body. I am I, omnipresence. And as you realize that, it becomes of no importance to you whether your body continues to function on this plane or not, or whether you function on this plane or not, visibly or invisibly, for you know that whether you're functioning in the Hawaiian Islands or in England is of no importance whatsoever. The main thing is you're functioning. And so it is, as you gain the realization of your true identity, it makes no difference at all whether you function on this plane or another, because you always have the absolute knowledge that you are functioning. What happens at passing to those that do not realize their true identity? Bearing in mind that in reality all are immortal beings, whether it is realized or not. If that passing takes place without realization, then the awakening on the other plane is at exactly the same level of consciousness as this one, with always that same opportunity for awakening, the same opportunity that we have here and that we had when we came into this world. Remember, we came into this world unawakened and had to go through the years of physical discords, physical inharmonies, physical lacks, and physical pleasures before the awakening which changed all of that. So it is those who awaken or are born in the next experience, because remember, death is not the end of anything, it is the beginning. I don't know who said that, but it's a quote. Death is not the end, death is the beginning. And so it is, whatever it is the beginning of, it is at the same level of consciousness that one left this plane. And so those who leave in the same state of human consciousness that they were born in will awaken in that same state of consciousness, but because spiritual identity is their true identity, they have the same opportunity of awakening there as they had here. I heard a student remark, "I'm irritated when I get away because I can't get it all down. A word from you to tell us to recognize the presence in our attitude is more important than making a collection of your every word." This is absolutely true. Some may find it desirable to make a few notes as reminders of some point that revealed itself to them during a class, but the taking of notes is not important, because the taking of notes involves keeping the conscious thinking mind going. And while that is true, it is very difficult for that to operate, which is our real intelligence. You see, while there is only one mind, there are different levels of the operation and activity of that mind. And the conscious thinking mind is one level of the mind. But when we are consciously thinking, it is very difficult for an impartation of truth to come to us or to register with us. It is in a moment that ye think not that the bridegroom cometh. It is in the moment that ye think not, in the moment of be still and know that I am God. It is in stillness, in quietness, and in confidence that the Master appears. It is when we are in a degree of receptivity. Over and over I have said that the right attitude in coming to a class or a lecture is that of sitting at the feet of the Master. In other words, it is a state of receptivity, as if we were coming here to receive a message from God, not from a human on a platform. That individual on the platform can only at best be the instrument through which the message comes. But strangely enough, it is not, and he is not, a necessary part of the activity. In other words, if I was speaking here for the whole hour, and you had really come here not to hear me, but realizing that you were meeting two or more together to receive the Christ, to open your consciousness to truth, then in this room and during this hour, a truth could flash into your consciousness entirely separate, entirely apart from anything that I may say up here. In other words, just the mere fact of our meditation together would lift you into a state of consciousness where you would either apprehend, that is, spiritually discern some truth revealed through me, or you would yourself receive an impartation within yourself. And so it is that the important thing in these meetings, in classes, in visiting with your teacher, the important thing is a state of receptivity to truth, not a faith or a confidence in the individual, but rather a faith and confidence in God imparting itself. And then it may come through the teacher, or it may come direct to you. It is actually this thinking mind, this reasoning mind, this conscious activity of thought that nearly always is the barrier to our receptivity to truth. And the proof of that is that truth doesn't often come to the thinker. It comes more often to those who have learned to be still, to listen, to receive impartations within themselves. And so it is, and of course in our case, there is even less necessity for taking notes, because we not only have the tapes, but eventually it all gets into print anyhow, in the monthly letters, in articles in the magazines that publish them, and later on in books, because actually all of our books were at one time classes, were at one time on tape, with the exception of the original book, The Infinite Way. There isn't a single one of our writings that wasn't originally a class. So they're all on tape, and eventually they get into book form, articles, booklets, pamphlets, and so they'll always be available. Will you please explain the relationship between faith and spiritual consciousness? That could open up quite an argument, because while we know definitely what spiritual consciousness is, I don't think we could agree on what faith is. Faith has far too many different meanings and shadings of meanings for us to agree on what that means. Faith, in the sense in which it is ordinarily used in religion, that is, believing in the unknown or a blind belief in something unknown, would have no relationship to spiritual consciousness at all. On the other hand, the attainment of spiritual consciousness would undoubtedly result in a faith. And that's not a very satisfactory answer, I know. And the difference between creative imagination and reality. Reality is an activity of God, God itself in expression. Creative imagination is an activity of a human being. And therefore, they are further apart than the North and the South poles. There is no relationship whatsoever between creative imagination and reality. Creative imagination is entirely in the realm of the human, which means the illusory. And reality is in the realm of God, and that which is in and of and is the activity of God. Would you relate, please, the necessity for time for spiritual fruitage to the principle of no time, no yesterday, tomorrow, instant healing now? Of course. At this very moment, the sun is shining. But there is no use of our thinking in terms of enjoying it, except through the lapse of time, until that sun gets around to us. Now, spiritual fruitage is at its full zenith this very moment within you and within me. And the time element is our coming into the awareness of that truth. In other words, I and my Father are one. There's no becoming, there's no waiting, there's no time element in that. Son, thou art ever with me, and all that I have is thine. But that hardly would suffice if I went over to this new building going up overlooking Hyde Park and told them I want one of those flats for 40,000 pounds because all that the Father hath is mine. I'm sure they would tell me, go home and wait for realization. But it is literally true, remember, that I and the Father are one. It is true this very second that all that the Father hath is mine. I am the Son of God, and therefore I am an heir of God, and joint heir to all the heavenly riches. And you know, that has misled some metaphysicians to going out and running up bills knowing that they'll be met next month. That's a very bad practice. It is wiser to wait before we spend our inheritance until we come into the actual possession of it, the actual realized possession. It is true. Let no one ever even try to convince you that it is not true, that all that the Father hath is yours now. The immortality, the eternality, spiritual health, spiritual wisdom, God's grace is yours now, and there's no waiting for it. The waiting is the period that it takes between our intellectual acceptance of this truth and our spiritual demonstration of it. That is why you surely understand that I caution students not to go into the healing work until they have the demonstrable healing consciousness. The moment you know intellectually that error is not a reality, that it does not exist as God substance or with God law or God ordination, you really have the truth that makes you free. But you haven't yet the realization of that truth. And there too is the difference between the conscious thinking mind that knows evil is unreal and that other state of mind which is a complete silence of words and thoughts, in which that truth becomes a realized, demonstrable truth. And so the only time element is not in establishing truth, but in the attainment of the demonstration. And here too is an illustration from the Oriental, where they speak of the veil of illusion, or the mist that went up. In other words, there is something separating us as humans from the divine being and its grace, which we are. And whether you call that a veil of illusion or the mist that went up, whatever name you call it, it means a sense of separation from realized perfection. And so it is that the only time element is the time necessary for us, after we know the letter of truth, to attain realization of truth. And that element of time is relative. I have witnessed with students that in one meditation they awakened to realization. And I've noticed with other students that after 5 years of meditation they have not yet awakened to realization. And so it differs, and the difference, I'm sure, comes in our background, in that period before our earth span. In other words, we had not come to this plane sufficiently developed spiritually to enable us to awaken quickly. You have said that we do not all become healers. While it is true that many mystics have not been healers, if the attainment of fourth dimensional consciousness comes through the infinite way, which is based on healing principles, wouldn't healing of disease of necessity be embodied in the state of consciousness attained? Yes, it would, but that would not make of everyone a healer. It would make it possible for them to heal, and it would make it essential that some healing works come through, but that still would not take them into the realm of being a healer, that is, being available primarily for healing works. I do believe that everyone who catches the light through the infinite way does do healing work, but they do not all become healers, yet they all heal. Actually, they heal not by conscious effort, but by the attained state of consciousness, and which they now are. And they may still pursue their art, their profession, their business, and find that their healing consciousness takes the effect of changing human relationships, changing the nature of individuals who come in contact with them, making their business and others more harmonious or more prosperous. The healing consciousness may bring forth a greater degree of art or literature or science or business capacity, all of which is healing, but all of which does not mean that an individual sets out to be a healer. You have previously said that students who have gone into the work without a healing consciousness have failed. Did that mean those with only a knowledge of the letter of truth? Yes, that's exactly what I meant. Those who, because they have studied the books, believe that they know the truth, and then want to become healers, and then find that even though they know the truth and can give a treatment, that it doesn't work. And they wonder why. The reason is that the letter of truth does not heal. The letter of truth is used as a stepping stone. It is used for study, for practice in the developing of spiritual consciousness. And it is the attained spiritual consciousness that does the healing work. Once you have that healing consciousness, you don't use the letter anymore, although the background of your consciousness is the truth of that letter or embodied in that letter. Now let us see clearly what we mean by this. What is the healing consciousness? Let's make that our subject tonight. As light appears, as in the dawn, as in the morning dawn, darkness or blackness disappears. And this is a strange statement, because there is no darkness, and there is no blackness. Nobody can find darkness. There is no entity such as darkness. Darkness is merely an absence of light, but it isn't a thing. It isn't a condition. It isn't an entity. Therefore, it is not wholly correct to say that the light dispels darkness or light overcomes darkness, for there is no darkness. There is nothing to be overcome by light. Light comes and it is. And where it is, there is certainly no darkness. But its coming doesn't dispel anything, doesn't overcome anything, doesn't destroy anything. But the light coming is the light. Now, a healing consciousness is one that has attained some measure of realization that that which the world calls sin, disease, death, hate, envy, jealousy, lust, animality, greed, that these are not entities. These are but the absence of God. They are not things, they are not conditions, they are not actualities, they are but the absence of God. And, or let us put it this way, the absence of God realized. That's better, because God is everywhere, but of no avail. God is only of avail when realized. Remember, we have had this pointed out in unmistakable language. Somebody lights a match, a house gets on fire, and some children are burned to death, and God was right there. Almost every day some woman is raped somewhere, and God was right there. And men are murdered in wars and out of wars, and women too, and God is right there, because God is omnipresence. But these things do not happen where God is realized. Where the presence of the Lord is, there is freedom. In thy presence is fulfillment. Therefore, the discords of earthly existence only take place in the absence of God realized. The realization of God, we will say, dispels sin, disease, death, lack, and limitation, but it does that only in the same sense that light dispels darkness. In other words, it really doesn't. The presence of God is the presence of God, harmony, wholeness, completeness. The absence of God may appear as sin, disease, death, wars, lack, limitation, unemployment, any of the so-called human discords, and some of the human harmonies too, take place only as the absence of God. In other words, the pleasures of sense as well as the pains of sense all take place as the absence of God. Where the presence of God is realized, there are no more pleasures of sense or pains of sense. Whatever pleasures there are spiritual pleasures, spiritual joys, spiritual abundance. And so it is that a healing consciousness is your consciousness when you have attained a measure of realization of the unreal nature of the appearance world. That is what Gautama called Maya. Remember, he did not set out to be a healer, and he did not set out to learn how to heal disease. When he set out on his mission, it was to discover what would remove sin, disease, and death from the earth. Not merely heal you or me, but remove all of sin, disease, death, lack, and limitation from the earth. And when he had his illusion, when he had his illumination, it was revealed to him that sin, disease, death, lack, and limitation, these are Maya illusion. In other words, they have no existence. They are only pictures in the human mind, images of thought. I don't know to what extent he realized that these were produced by the belief in two powers, good and evil. Now, in proportion as this same realization comes to you, not that you want to be a healer, not that you want to heal your neighbor or your family, but as it dawns in your consciousness that the very omnipotence, omnipresence, omniscience of God makes material sense an impossibility, and therefore they can only exist as darkness or ignorance, appearance, mirage, mist, hypnotism. As you realize this, you have the healing consciousness, even though you may never set yourself up to use it just for individual healing. Yet automatically, everyone who comes into range of your consciousness is improved. They may actually have healings of serious disease, or they may lose some of their sinful desires or appetites or false appetites. Their lives may be changed by being brought into your consciousness, not because you consciously want to heal them, but because you are living and moving and having your being in the realization of God. In other words, you're living a state of illumined consciousness in which the discords of earth and even the pleasures of earth have no reality. They have existence, but not reality. They have existence only as shadows, mirage, appearances. So it is then that we caution students never to have the desire to be a healer. It's a false desire. It's really ego at work. No one should really ever have an ambition to be a healer. To me, that's just as erroneous as wanting to be a millionaire. And that's erroneous. It's all right to be a millionaire. It's wrong to desire to be one. Because spiritually, there's only one legitimate desire, and that is to know him aright. Whom to know aright is life eternal. It may make you a millionaire, and if it does, you'll know how to use your money judiciously, wisely, lovingly. There's nothing wrong about being a millionaire. And if you attain this healing consciousness, it may make you a healer, and that's a wonderful thing to be. It's wrong to desire it, because it separates you from God. It's an indication that you're desiring an effect instead of cause. And we have no right on the spiritual path to desire any effect. And there too, healing consciousness can only come in proportion as we lose the desire for effects. There's no effect that we want. We don't want to be a healer. We don't want to be a teacher. We don't want to be an author. We don't want to be this, that, or the other thing. We seek to know him aright. We seek to bend ourselves to God's will, to yield ourselves to God's will. And if in that we attain this consciousness of God's presence, if we attain the consciousness of God as our being, then naturally we are the light. And then the darkness that comes to us evaporates. And yet it doesn't evaporate because it wasn't in it. Its place is taken by the light. For where there is light, there can be no darkness. And where there is God realized, there can be no sin, disease, death, lack, or limitation. There can only be the presence of God, made manifest in accord with our own state of realized consciousness. And so it is. A healing consciousness is one that does not use God and does not use God power and does not use spiritual power, because it recognizes nothing over which or upon which to use a power. In other words, if you were to think of the sun as a means of overcoming darkness, using sun to overcome darkness, you would be off the track. But if you realized that the sun is light, and where the light is there is no darkness, you would be on the beam. And so it is, if you realize God as omnipresence, omnipotence, omniscience, beside which there is nothing else, if you recognize God as spirit and its creation as spiritual, you are on the right beam. And then every opposing appearance all of a sudden isn't there. And we say truth has overcome error, or we say the immortal has overcome the mortal, or God has destroyed the error, but none of those statements are actually factual. The fact is that where God is, nothing else is. Where spirit is, there is no matter or material sense. God is, and God is omnipresence. And this means when you have realized God as I am the light of the world, and in me there is no darkness. Well, then what has become of the old sins and diseases and lacks? I don't know, they're not around. Where did they go to? If they went somewhere, they must still exist somewhere. No, I don't think my old sins and my old diseases and my old lacks exist anywhere. I think they have just disappeared into the nothingness that they actually were. In other words, there were no sins, and there were no diseases, and there were no lacks. There were just such figments of belief entertained in thought. Where did 2 times 2 is 5 go? When the awareness of 2 times 2 is 4 comes in. Well, the only thing to do is let us search and see if we can find 2 times 2 is 5. If it was here, it must have gone someplace. But you see, it wasn't here. It had no existence. It was merely a misbelief, a misperception on our part. But it isn't going anywhere. It hasn't gone anywhere. And 4 didn't do anything to that 5. 4 being 4 is just 4. But actually, you know there wasn't any 5 around, don't you? There never was a 5 at the end of 2 times 2 to be dispelled or to be overcome or to be removed. It just didn't exist. It was an erroneous concept in our thought, and now it isn't there. But where it is, well, it's where it always was, no place, because there never was a 5. And there never was a sin anywhere on the face of the earth. And there never has been a death. Those of you who have heard many of the tapes must have heard that statement many, many times. There never has been a death on the face of the earth. No one has ever died. And no one ever will. There never has been a death. And no one has ever gone anyplace. And once you begin to realize that we exist as consciousness, not as body, as consciousness, you will understand why this is necessarily true. And therefore, life doesn't have to overcome death. There isn't any death to be overcome. God doesn't have to overcome death. And Jesus never called on God to overcome disease or death. Matter of fact, he said, I do not have to pray. Matter of fact, he said, what did hinder you? And he said, open thine eyes. But at no time did he say, I will call on my Father. Even the storm at sea he didn't call on God for. He merely said, peace, be still. Probably talking to his own thought. You will find many times that it helps you if you will turn to your own thought and say to it, peace, be still. And the reason is this: you are not your mind. any more than you are your body. You possess a mind and you possess a body. Now, who is this you? This you are going to call by I. Just as I'm going to say I, Joel, you are going to say I, John, I, William, I, Mary, I, Martha. Now that I is you. And you have a body. And you can say to your body, walk this way, walk that way. You can say to your hand, give or take. You can say, turn left, turn right. And your body cannot argue about it, because your body is not you, it is yours. So with your mind. The only reason that we are not completely clear about the mind is that many people have believed that the mind controls the man, and that the mind has jurisdiction over the individual, and this is not true. It is only true in the experience of those who accept that belief. Once you begin to perceive I, then you know I can think what I like. I can direct my thought in any direction in which I like. I can discipline my thought and my body. For there is an entity called I, and I am the master of my fate. I am the captain of my ship. I was given God-given dominion over everything, and that must include the mind and the body. And the very moment that I can acknowledge, I am an individual. I am an offspring of God. I have been endowed with dominion from on high. All that the Father hath is mine of dominion. Therefore I can say to my mind, be still. Be still and know that I am God, not you. Be still and know that I am sitting in the saddle, not you. Be still and know that I am at peace. And then you'll find that the mind will settle down into peace once you have let it know that you are at peace. I am one with my Father. I am joint heir to all the heavenly riches. All that the Father hath is mine. I embody all the good of the Godhead. I and my Father are one. And therefore I say to the mind, be still and know that I am boss. And body, just know that I govern you through the mind. And I don't have to do it by conscious thinking. Just the realization that I am I, and all the rest takes place without conscious thought. I do not have to know in advance anything about tomorrow. I don't have to instruct my mind about it or my body. I merely have to know that I am I, and the jurisdiction of my mind and body is in the I that I am. Oh, once in a while, at the height of its rebellion or rebelliousness, I might say to it, be still, be still. Remember, I am functioning. I am the important one here, not you. And so, I can say to the mind and I can say to the body, peace, be still. And then, as the mind settles down into that stillness, the storm out here, whatever its name or nature, evaporates. And in the same way, if you ask where did the storm go, it hasn't gone anywhere. It was an illusion, and it has been dispelled. It was a mirage. It existed as a figment of thought, and it is dispelled. But it isn't dispelled as something that was and isn't. It is dispelled in the same way that 2 times 2 is 5 is dispelled and replaced by 2 times 2 is 4. But it isn't really, because 2 times 2 is 4 was there all the time. Only now it's realized. And the moment 2 times 2 is 4 is realized, we just don't care what happened to 2 times 2 is 5. But if we do happen to think about it, we'll know that it never was there. And when we are healed of a false appetite, when we are healed of a sin, of a disease, of a lack, it's the same way. You look around and wonder, what happened to it? Where did it go? Did somebody else get it? No, if they've got it, it's their own. It isn't really catching, because there isn't any it. There isn't any 2 times 2 is 5, and there isn't any blackness or darkness. Therefore, we can truthfully say there is only an absence of God realization. Therefore, all we need for spiritual harmony, spiritual abundance, spiritual immortality is the realization of God. And now as you read the writings, you will see why it is that this is the entire basis and foundation of the infinite way. Realize God. And you'll find that the sins, diseases, deaths, and discords automatically are not there. But all the way through, 1/2 of the entire message of the infinite way is devoted to what we call the nature of error. Not that error exists, but it is a revelation of the non-existence of that mist picture or mirage picture, imaginary picture, based on a belief in 2 powers, good and evil. And there are not 2 powers, good and evil, and you learn that the very moment you give up using the power of truth or the power of God. The minute you give up using truth as a power and learn to resist not evil, you will see why so much of the message is given to the subject of the nature of error. It is to bring to your awareness the fact that you do not fight evil, and you do not even get God to fight your battles. All you do is realize God, realize light, realize omnipresence, and there is no other presence. The 5s have all gone. Then, spiritual consciousness or healing consciousness is your consciousness. Once you have realized is. Once you realized God is. Light is. And nothing else. In proportion as you are enabled to give up fighting error, using truth against error, praying to God to do something to error, in proportion to that, are you attaining God realization. Once you have God realization, well, there you have it again. In thy presence is fullness. Where the Spirit of the Lord is, there is liberty. Why? Because there cannot be slavery where there is liberty. But there is no slavery. Slavery is an absence of liberty. Liberty is an absence of God. Have God, you have liberty, and you don't have slavery. But you don't use one to destroy another. You attain God. Attaining God, you have liberty, and you have fulfillment. And then these other negative pleasures and pains are dissolved. They disappeared, but they didn't go anyplace. This lesson that we have had tonight is, of course, the ultimate of mystical teaching. There is no place to go after you have begun the realization of the nature of spiritual or Christ consciousness or the Buddha mind. The Buddha mind is the mind that recognizes all appearances to be illusion. Illusion is an entity or identity. We have Gautama until we have illumination. After we have illumination, we have Gautama the Buddha. And therefore, the Buddha mind, Buddhi means enlightenment. And enlightenment means the realization that all appearances exist only as illusion. Therefore, not entity or identity, not something to be removed, not something requiring a God power. Do you see how we now, tonight, are back at the opening night of this class, in which it was said that realized spiritual consciousness is the healer, is the dispeller of evil, that it is your state of illumination that determines the harmony of existence. It isn't a God somewhere, and it isn't getting a God to do something. It is the degree of your illumined consciousness. And your consciousness is illumined in the degree that you realize the pictures of sense, both good and evil, are illusory. And then relax in that, because now you are the light. Now you have become illumined. The very moment you know that darkness does not exist as an entity, it is only the absence of light, then let's have the light, and we have no more darkness. And let's have this realization that sin, disease, death, lack, limitation, material sense in any form is not an entity or identity. It is a state of hypnotism or illusion, mirage, appearance. And then rest in that word. Do not fight. The battle is not yours. They have only temporal power, the arm of flesh. You have this truth, that there is no power but the power that I am. The power that's embodied in me, that goes with me when I mount up to heaven, or if I make my bed in hell, or if I walk through the valley of the shadow of death. That which I am is the power and the presence of God. I don't have to consciously direct it. I need only know I am the light of the world. I embody the presence and power, dominion of God. I is the light of the world. Thank you.